Smoke filled the sky, dark and thick, covering the stars above like a heavy blanket. The ground shook with each explosion, the sound of war echoing through the broken city. Metal towers had fallen, streets were cracked open, and flames danced. Along the edges of the ruins, in the center of this chaos, a human soldier named Jackson limped through the shattered remains of an old arena. His uniform was torn, one arm bleeding, and his left boot half melted from plasma fire. He had run out of ammo hours ago, now gripping only a broken metal pipe. Every corner could be his last, and every shadow could hide an enemy drone. Still, he kept walking, each step heavy, his breath shallow. Suddenly a sound, light footsteps, too soft for machines, too slow for soldiers. He raised the pipe and turned sharply, heart pounding, ready to fight. But it wasn't a drone. It wasn't a soldier. It was her. She stepped through a crumbling arch, tall and elegant, even in her damaged state. Her silver robes were ripped, stained with blood and ash, glowing jewelry cracked and fading. She held a broken plasma dagger in one hand, the blade flickering, barely alive. Her eyes, glowing violet, met Jackson's with a cold fire. Sharp, focused, royal, Lady Varelia of the House Sereth. Once the noble voice of an entire alien empire, now stood alone in the ruins. Jackson froze, his mind racing. She shouldn't be here. He had seen her image before on war briefings, on wanted posters, in enemy broadcasts. She was royalty, important, powerful, unreachable. Yet now she looked almost human, tired, wounded, lost. They stared at each other, both unsure, both too weak to fight yet too proud to run. Then she spoke, her voice steady but low. "I should not be here," she said, "but I will not die alone." Jackson lowered his pipe slightly, confused. "Are you alone?" he asked. She nodded once, slowly. "My guards are dead, my people gone," she replied. "Your drones hunt me too, human." "They're not mine," Jackson muttered. "I'm just trying to get out of here." Another explosion rocked the ground nearby, and both flinched. The arena wall behind her cracked and crumbled, pieces falling close to her feet. She didn't move, didn't even blink, just looked at the rubble, then back at him. "I don't trust you," Jackson said honestly, "but you don't look like a threat right now." Her lips curved, almost. A smile, but not quite. "I'm too tired to kill you," she replied, "even if I wanted to." He looked around, the sky burning above them. Enemy drones flying in distant patterns. The arena wouldn't last long, and open ground was suicide. "There's a maintenance tunnel below this arena," Jackson said, pointing to a half-collapsed stairwell. "It's safer than here." She hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Jackson shrugged, wincing from pain. "Maybe I'm just too stupid to leave you here," he said. "Or maybe I hate this war more than I hate you." For a moment, silence. Then she nodded again, quietly. "Very well," she said, and stepped beside him. Together they descended into the shadows of the tunnel, the air cold and damp. Their footsteps echoed in the dark, one human, one alien, walking side by side. Above them, the last walls of the arena fell with a crash, sealing the entrance behind them. The light disappeared, and only darkness remained ahead. But something strange filled the silence now. Something Jackson couldn't name yet. It wasn't fear or anger. It was something else. A feeling that this meeting was not just luck, that something deeper had just begun. The tunnel was narrow and cold, its walls made of old stone and metal. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing with each drop. Jackson moved slowly, watching every step, while Lady Varelia followed just behind him. Neither spoke for a long time, both listening for any sound. From above, Jackson's flashlight flickered, casting shadows on the cracked walls. "These tunnels were built before the war," he whispered, "used for escape or hiding." Varelia nodded, her hand on the wall for balance. "I never thought I would walk through such a place," she said, her voice quiet, almost ashamed. Sudden noise made them stop, metal clanking above, then a low hum. Jackson turned off the flashlight, motioning her to stay still. Enemy drones, hovering machines that hunted with sound and heat, were nearby. They could hear them now, scanning the upper levels of the arena. "They're looking for us," Jackson whispered, tightening his grip on the broken pipe. Virelia touched the small crystal at her neck, once glowing bright, now nearly dark. "It's my tracker," she said. "They're following my blood." Jackson's eyes widened. "You've been bleeding since the fight," he said. "They're using that to track you." He reached into his satchel, pulling out a small metal box. It was a human emergency sealant, something used to stop bleeding fast, even in war zones. "This will hurt," he warned, opening the lid. "I've felt worse," she replied coldly. Lifting her sleeve to show the wound, he sprayed the sealant and Virelia hissed in pain, her skin sizzling from the reaction. She didn't scream, didn't flinch, just clenched her jaw and looked away. Jackson wrapped a cloth around her arm. After the spray settled, "That should buy us time," he said, standing again. Virelia nodded once, still silent, still proud. But her eyes met his for a moment, just a moment, full of something softer. They moved deeper into the tunnels, stepping over broken tiles and forgotten bones. Ancient signs on the walls showed symbols of her people, from a time before the war. "I used to think humans were monsters," she said suddenly, her voice flat. Jackson didn't respond, just kept walking. "I saw the news feeds, the battlefield reports," she continued. "They called you dangerous, wild, heartless." Jackson stopped, turned slowly. "And what do you think now?" he asked. She paused, looking at the dim light from his flashlight. "I think I never saw the full truth," she admitted. "You fight like beasts, yes, but not without reason." Jackson sighed, sitting on a broken crate. "We didn't ask for this war," he said. "We were dragged into it." Before she could answer, a sharp buzzing filled the air. "Down!" Jackson shouted, pulling her behind the crate. A scout drone zipped through a nearby side passage, its red light scanning the walls. They held their breath, waiting as the light passed over them, but didn't stop. Then, just as it began to turn away, Virelia's broken dagger let out a faint spark. The drone froze, turned back and charged, its arms unfolding into spinning blades. Jackson pushed her aside and swung his pipe with all his strength, smashing the drone against the wall. Sparks flew as the machine cracked and fell, its light flickering out. Jackson fell back, breathing hard. "Too close," he muttered, holding his side. Virelia rushed to him, kneeling. "You're bleeding again," she said, looking at his torn uniform. He shook his head. "I'm fine," he lied, though his face was pale. Virelia pressed her hand against his wound gently. "I owe you my life," she whispered. "You could have let it kill me." Jackson gave a weak smile. "I'm just not good at letting people die," he replied. They stayed there for a few minutes, catching their breath. Then Jackson stood again, slowly, using the wall for support. "We can't stay here," he said. "There's a power hub ahead, old tech, but it might help us." Virelia stood beside him, helping him walk. "Let's go, human," she said firmly, her voice stronger than before. He glanced at her, surprised by the change in tone. "You're not giving up?" he asked. "I can't afford to," she replied. "Not anymore." As they walked deeper into the tunnel, something had changed, not just the direction, but the air between them. They were no longer enemies, no longer strangers. They were survivors, fighting. The same fight step by step, and somewhere in the dark more drones were coming. The power hub was hidden behind an old steel door covered in dust and burn marks. Jackson leaned against the frame, coughing hard, his side bleeding again. Lady Virelia stepped forward, her fingers tracing the ancient panel. "This was once part of my family's city," she whispered. "Now even the walls have forgotten us." Jackson used his last bit of strength to pry the door open. It screeched loudly, the sound echoing down the tunnel like a scream. Inside, dim blue lights glowed weakly, showing a round chamber filled with broken tech and flickering wires. The walls buzzed with a faint current, enough to charge a beacon or alert more enemies. He stumbled inside and collapsed onto a rusted chair. Virelia followed, eyes scanning the old control panels. Some of this still works, she said, brushing dust from the screen. She tapped a few buttons, and a soft hum rose from the floor. Jackson groaned, pressing his hand to the wound. On his side, "You said you studied war tech?" he asked, voice rough. "Yes," she replied, walking over. "But I was never meant to use it." He looked at her, sweat running down his face. "Then why are you here, fighting and bleeding in tunnels like this?" Virelia didn't answer. Right away, instead, she knelt beside him and began to unwrap his blood-soaked bandage. "I was supposed to be safe," she said finally. "Behind walls, protected by guards, giving orders but never touching a weapon." Jackson winced as she sprayed the wound with a healing mist she found in a supply box. "But everything changed when my brother betrayed the council," she continued. "He blamed humans, started the raids, and killed anyone who spoke against him." "You?" Jackson asked, gritting his teeth. "He tried," she said, eyes flashing. "But I escaped." She gently pressed her palm against the wound, letting the healing serum soak in. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "This will burn." The serum reacted with his blood. Glowing orange as steam rose from the injury, Jackson screamed, but didn't move away. Virelia held firm, watching his skin seal under the fire-like reaction. The smell of burning flesh filled the chamber, but the bleeding stopped. "You're lucky your body accepts alien healing tech," she said softly. "Most humans wouldn't survive it." He looked at her, breathing heavy. "And you? Are you still noble after all this?" She stood slowly, her face unreadable. "I don't know what I am anymore," she said. "But I know I can't go back." Jackson pushed himself upright, wiping his forehead. "Well, whatever you are now, you saved my life," he said. "I guess that makes us even." Suddenly, a red light blinked on the screen nearby. Virelia rushed to it, typing fast. "They found us," she said. "2 scout drones coming down the east tunnel." Jackson grabbed the broken pipe again, but Virelia stopped him. "No," she said, "let me fight this time." He stared at her, surprised. "You sure?" She nodded, picking up a discarded plasma blaster from a storage crate. "It's old," she said, checking the charge, "but it will fire once." Jackson stepped back, watching as she positioned herself near the door. The drones approached, fast, the sound of spinning metal blades growing louder. She waited, breath slow, finger on the trigger. The moment the first drone entered the room, she fired. The blast hit the drone dead center, exploding it in a shower of sparks. The second drone darted sideways, but Jackson lunged and slammed his pipe into its sensor. The drone spun wildly, crashing into the wall and shattering to pieces. Silence returned, except for the hum of the machines. Virelia lowered the weapon, breathing hard. Jackson smiled faintly, wiping blood from his lip. "Not bad for a royal," he said. She turned to him, face calm but proud. "I told you," she said. "I will fight, even if it kills me." They spent the next hour securing the chamber, sealing doors, recharging what little power they could. Jackson found an old communicator and began repairing it. Virelia watched him, her arms crossed, eyes full of thought. "You risked your life for me back there," she said after a while. He looked up, hands still working. "So did you," he replied. "That makes us allies." "No," she said, voice lower. "That makes us something more." He raised an eyebrow, curious. "Something more?" She nodded slowly. "I don't know what to call it yet," she said. "But I haven't felt this kind of trust in years." Jackson didn't answer, but his hands paused for a moment. Then he smiled quietly and went back to fixing the communicator. Outside the room, more footsteps echoed in the dark. Heavier this time, the true enemy was getting closer. But inside the old chamber, a human and an alien noblewoman sat side by side, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as survivors bound by fire, blood, and something deeper neither had expected. The quiet hum of old machines filled the chamber. Jackson sat beside the communicator, adjusting wires and tapping gently on the cracked screen. Each flicker of light gave him a bit of hope, but the signal was still too weak. They were alone, deep underground, and help felt 1,000 miles away. Virelia stood by a rusted mirror panel staring at her reflection. Her long silver hair was dirty, tangled, and her once bright royal marks were smudged with ash and blood. She barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Not the proud leader from the palace halls, not the voice of the council. "You look tired," Jackson said softly, not turning around. Virelia didn't answer at first, then spoke in a low voice. "I look like a fraud," she whispered. "A liar in a crown." Jackson looked back at her, surprised by her tone. "You're still standing," he said. "That means something." Virelia turned slowly, her violet eyes hollow. "You don't know what I've done," she said, walking closer. "I once gave a speech," she began. "It was broadcast across systems. I stood tall in my shining robe and said, 'Humanity must be watched, studied, and controlled.'" Jackson listened quietly, not interrupting. She continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I said you were dangerous, too emotional, unpredictable. I told my people that the war was necessary." She paused, her hands trembling. "I believed it, until I saw what my own people were doing in the name of peace. I saw humans in cages, children forced to work, villages burned, all to keep our hands clean." Jackson lowered the communicator, letting her speak. Her face twisted in pain, not physical but deep, heavy shame. "I tried to speak up in private," she said. "The others laughed, called me soft. My brother said I was weak, too close to human thinking." She sat down on a crate, arms around herself. "He tried to silence me, called it treason," she whispered. "So I ran." For a moment, Jackson said nothing. Then he leaned back against the wall and looked up at the dark ceiling. "I've heard 100 speeches, from leaders who never touched the dirt," he said. "You're the first one I've met who bled beside me." Virelia looked at him, tears forming in her eyes. "I don't deserve your kindness," she said. Jackson shook his head slowly. "It's not about what you deserve," he replied. "It's about what you choose next." She blinked, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I'm choosing to fight," she said softly, "but I don't know who I am anymore." Jackson reached into his satchel and pulled out a small metal badge. It was bent and burned. "This was my squad's emblem," he said. "We used to call ourselves the Firewalkers." "What happened to them?" she asked, her voice gentle. He looked down at the badge, eyes full of memory. "They were wiped out in a night raid," he said. "I survived by accident." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I hated your people that day," he said honestly. "I wanted revenge. But then I saw your wound, your fear, and I remembered we're just trying to survive." Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was quiet understanding, like two storms finally settling. Suddenly, the communicator buzzed. A weak signal broke through. Jackson jumped up, tuning the device quickly. Come on," he muttered, twisting wires and tapping buttons. A voice crackled through the static, garbled, but real. "Zone 7, survivors." "Repeat." Jackson grinned wide. "It's a rescue team," he said. "They're sweeping nearby zones." Virelia stood up fast, hope rising in her chest. "Can we call them?" "Maybe," Jackson said, "but the signal's not strong enough yet. I need to boost it." As he worked, Virelia moved to the panel and activated an old energy conduit. Blue light pulsed through the walls, shaking dust from the ceiling. "I can hold it steady," she said, gripping the handle tightly. "Do it," Jackson replied, just a few seconds more. The light surged and the signal grew clearer. "This is Zone 7, Jackson called. 2 survivors requesting pickup." "Confirmed," the voice replied. "Mark flare signal for extraction." Jackson laughed in relief, but then heard a new sound. Metal boots, closing in. Virelia's eyes widened. "They're here," she whispered. "The enemy found us." Jackson reached for his pipe while she grabbed the blaster again. "We can't lose this signal," he said. "If they take this hub, we're gone." Virelia stood. Beside him, her hands steady. "I won't run this time," she said. "Let them come." And as the door shook from enemy force, Jackson smiled. "You're not a noble anymore," he said. "You're a warrior now." She gave a small nod, her face calm, her heart burning. "For the first time in my life," she said, "I feel like I'm fighting for something real." The old steel door trembled again, dust falling from the ceiling like soft rain. Jackson gripped his pipe tighter, eyes locked on the entry. Beside him, Virelia stood tall, the plasma blaster humming softly in her hands. Outside, the enemy was gathering. Heavy footsteps, metallic clicking, and deep echoing voices. "They're not drones," Jackson whispered. "No," Virelia said, her face hardening. "They're royal hunters, sent to kill defectors like me." Jackson swallowed. "Hardem, how many?" "Too many," she replied, her voice calm but heavy. "We need to run," he said quickly. "This room won't hold." Virelia looked at the far wall where an old crest was etched in faded silver, an emblem of her family, a sun behind a sword. She walked to it and pressed her hand against the metal. Nothing happened at first. Then a low rumble, and part of the wall slid open. Behind it stood a tall archway made of ancient stone and glowing blue veins. A hidden vault door, smooth, sealed and humming with quiet energy. Jackson stared in shock. "What is this?" he asked. "It's a legacy chamber," she said, stepping closer. "Built for emergencies, only accessible by royal blood." She touched the center, and a soft blue light scanned her hand. Then it stopped, and nothing happened. "No good?" Jackson asked. Virelia frowned, confused. "It needs a second life signature, and not just any life, but one the system marks as worthy." Jackson blinked. "Worthy?" "Yes," she said. "The AI that runs these doors, it reads DNA, history, intention. It was designed to stop traitors, or cowards, from using it." Jackson looked at the sealed door, then back at her. "You think it'll accept me?" She gave him a long look, then nodded slowly. "It should. You've earned that much." He stepped forward and placed his hand beside hers. For a moment, nothing. Then the wall lit up with a soft chime. "Accepted," the system said in a neutral voice. The vault door opened with a deep groan. Dust, flying everywhere. Inside was a massive circular room filled with armor, weapons, and ancient tools of war. But at the center stood something different, something powerful. A giant armored exosuit, shining black and silver, tall as two men. Its chest bore the same sun and sword crest. "What is that?" Jackson asked, wide-eyed. "The Royal Bastion," Virelia said, stepping forward. "Built for the throne's protector. No one's worn it in 100 years, she added, her voice soft with wonder. Jackson walked around it, touching the cold metal. "Looks heavy." "It is," she replied. "It was meant for someone larger than most aliens." She paused, then looked at him. "But you might fit." He raised an eyebrow. "Me? You're strong, fast, stubborn," she said, almost smiling. "You protected me more than my own guards ever did." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right, help me in." It took a few minutes to activate the suit. The machine hissed and opened like a flower, revealing a seat and control rings. Jackson climbed in, settling his arms into the power sleeves. It closed around him, the inside lights glowing softly, adapting to his human body. "System linked," the AI said. "Vital signs locked. Strength protocols enabled." Jackson stood tall now, encased in armor that made him feel like a tank with legs. He flexed his hands, the suit responded perfectly. Meanwhile, Virelia reloaded the plasma blaster and pulled a slim energy blade from the wall. She turned to him, breathing faster now. "Ready?" He nodded inside the helmet, his voice amplified through the speakers. "Let's give them a welcome." The door behind them finally burst open, royal hunters pouring in with glowing weapons and black armor. But this time, Jackson didn't. "Step back." He stepped forward. The first hunter raised his gun. Jackson crushed it with one armored punch. The second lunged. Virelia sliced across its chest with her energy blade, spinning gracefully. They fought together, like fire and steel. One blocking, the other striking, enemies fell one by one. unable to match their speed or strength, but they kept coming. Virelia began to slow, her breath sharp, her arm bleeding again. Jackson saw it and moved in front of her, shielding her from a plasma blast. The suit's armor sparked but held. Strong. She looked up at him, panting. "You saved me again." "You keep needing it," he said with a small smile. She gave a soft laugh, just one breath of joy, before raising her blade again. "We're not done yet." They fought there, way back to the chamber's entrance. Where the communicator still blinked, Jackson grabbed a flare from the wall, slammed it into the floor, and pulled Virelia beside him. A red beacon burst into the air through a crack above, visible to the skies. "They'll come," he said. "If we survive that long," she added. They turned to face the last wave of hunters, blood dripping from her fingers, sparks flying from his suit. "We hold here," he said, "together." She raised her blade, voice strong. "Far beyond my limits. But I must endure." And beside her, the human she once called an enemy stood like a wall of fire, ready to face whatever came next. The air inside the ruined chamber was thick with smoke and energy sparks. Metal walls glowed from heat, and the floor shook with every explosion. Jackson stood in the royal armor suit, shoulders rising and falling as steam hissed from the joints. Virelia crouched beside him, one hand on the floor, blood dripping from her fingers. More royal hunters poured through the broken tunnel door, larger, ones now armored like walking tanks. "They're bringing in the elites," she said, her voice hoarse. Jackson turned to her, visor glowing. "How many more can we fight?" Virelia looked up at him, tired but not broken. "As many as we must." The first elite stormed forward, firing twin plasma cannons. Jackson raised his arms. Energy shields flared, catching the blast. He pushed forward with a roar, smashing into the enemy with raw power. The impact shook the ground, sparks flying in all directions behind him. Virelia spun around a second elite, slicing at joints with her energy blade. But her movements were slower now, her breathing heavy, steps shaky. Her wounds had reopened, red stains spreading across her robe. Still, she didn't stop. Didn't slow down. One mistake, one slip of her foot. A blast grazed her shoulder and threw her into a wall. She hit hard, collapsing with a painful cry, her blade falling from her hand. "Virelia!" Jackson shouted, charging toward her as another hunter raised its weapon. He dove between them, slamming his armored fist into the attacker's head. The enemy dropped, but Jackson knelt beside her, lifting her gently. "I'm fine," she whispered, her lips pale. "You're not," he said. "You can't go on like this." Her eyes fluttered open, weak but determined. "I must," she said. "This is my fault. My war. I must finish it." Jackson clenched his jaw, pulling her behind a fallen pillar for cover. He checked her wound. It was deep, glowing with strange blue blood. "You can't even lift your arm," he said, voice full of pain. "I can still." "Speak," she replied. "Still choose." She reached up and touched his chest plate. "I chose to stand with you, not behind you." Above them, another group of enemies approached, the last wave carrying a core disruptor bomb. "If they activate that thing," Jackson said, "the entire chamber goes up in smoke." He looked at Virelia, thinking, then pulled a small device from her belt. "What's this?" "It's the detonator," she whispered. "For the vault's defense charge, one blast enough to wipe the room." "But it only works from the center," he said, looking at the glowing panel across the room. She nodded slowly. "I can reach it," she said, trying to stand, but her knees gave out. Jackson caught her before she fell. "You can't even walk," he said. "You'll die in there." She looked up at him with eyes full of tears and pride. "Then let me die standing. Let me finish this as the warrior you showed me I could be." Jackson hesitated, then slowly nodded. He lifted her in his arms, carried her to the edge of the blast circle. "You sure?" he asked one last time. She nodded weakly. "For my people. For yours." He gave her the detonator and stepped back into cover. Virelia limped toward the center, each step slower than the last. Blasts flew around her, but the enemies hesitated, shocked to see her walking into the light. She reached the panel, her body shaking, her knees nearly collapsing. She turned her head, met Jackson's eyes from across the room, and smiled, then pressed the button. A blinding blue light shot upward, the core humming with energy. A wave of heat burst through the chamber, vaporizing the remaining hunters in seconds. Jackson shielded himself with the armor, falling to one knee from the force. When the light faded, everything was silent. Ash floated in the air like snow. The chamber, walls cracked and glowed, but held. Jackson stood slowly, searching the center. He saw her, collapsed beside the detonator, not moving. He ran to her, falling to his knees. "Virelia!" he shouted, pulling her into his arms. Her eyes were half open, breath shallow. "You did it," he whispered. "You stopped them." She smiled faintly. "I endured," she said, voice almost gone. He held her close, silent for a long moment. Then, above them, a beam of light pierced the ceiling. A human ship hovered overhead. The rescue signal had worked, ropes lowered, voices shouted. Medics came, rushing down, surrounding Jackson and lifting Virelia onto a stretcher. Her fingers brushed his hand as they took her up. "Don't leave me," she whispered. "Never," he replied, climbing up after her. The sky above the human outpost was bright for the first time in days. Sunlight poured through clean windows, warming the cold metal walls. Inside the recovery room, machines beeped softly, keeping steady rhythm. Virelia lay on a medical bed, her body wrapped in bandages, skin pale but peaceful. Jackson sat beside her, armor gone, his shirt still stained with dried blood. He hadn't left her side since they arrived. Not even once. She stirred, her fingers twitching, eyelids fluttering open. The first thing she saw was Jackson's tired face, his rough smile. "You're awake," he said gently. Her lips moved slowly. "I thought I was gone." "You almost were," he said, reaching for her hand. "But you pulled off something no one else could." She looked around the quiet room, the bright walls, the green trees visible through the window. "This isn't a palace," she whispered. "No," Jackson said, "but it's safe." For a while, neither spoke. They just sat in silence, hand in hand, listening to the peaceful beeps of healing machines. Then she spoke again, her voice steadier now. Did the message go out?" Jackson nodded. "Your broadcast reached both sides," he said, human and alien. Her eyes widened. "I told them everything," she whispered. "The truth, the betrayal, the blood." He gave a soft nod. "And they listened." She closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. "Maybe now. The war will slow," she said. "Maybe," Jackson agreed. "And maybe it starts with people like us." The door opened softly, and a young human officer entered with a data pad. He looked nervous, glancing at Virelia before handing Jackson the pad. "Message from High Command," the officer said. "They want to talk to her." "When she's ready," Jackson read the message, eyebrows raising slightly. "They want to offer you protection, and maybe even a position," he said, handing it to her. She looked down at the screen but didn't respond right away. "Another title?" she said quietly. "Another name to wear like armor?" Jackson leaned forward. "No," he said. "This time, you get to choose who you are." She looked up at him. Really looked. Not at a soldier, not at a weapon, but at the man who had bled beside her. "Then I choose to stay here," she said, "not as a noble, but as someone rebuilding something real." Later that day, a gathering was held in the outpost courtyard. Humans and aliens stood side by side, not as enemies, but as survivors. Virelia walked slowly into the light, supported by Jackson, wearing a simple tunic and cloak, no crown, no royal colors, just a soft smile and a scar on her cheek. The crowd went quiet, watching her with wide eyes. She stepped forward and raised her voice. "I was born to rule from a throne," she said, "but I learned more on the battlefield than I ever did in the palace." She looked at the humans in the crowd, soldiers, engineers, medics, cooks. "You showed me pain, but also compassion," she said. "You showed me strength, but also mercy." Then she looked at the aliens, many who once served her family. "I stood above you once," she said, But that place means nothing if it's built on silence and fear. I am no longer your ruler, she said firmly. I am your sister in survival. A hush followed her words, and then, slowly, applause began. One by one, hands clapped, voices rose. Not for a queen, but for a fighter who chose to stand with them, not over them. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Jackson sat beside her under a tree. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of fresh soil and wildflowers. I think you've got fans now, he teased. Kay laughed gently, leaning her head on his shoulder. It feels strange, she said, to be loved for who I am, not what I am. He looked at her, smiling. Who you are is enough, he said. It always was. She turned to him, eyes shining in the golden light. Then maybe, I'm ready to live a new life. He raised an eyebrow. Here? With us? She nodded slowly. If you'll have me. Jackson didn't hesitate. I already do. She reached out and took his hand again, the same way she had in the tunnels. But now there was no fear, no pain, just peace. The war had taken so much from them, titles, homes, even parts of themselves. But in the ruins, they had found something the fire couldn't burn, something true, a new kind of royalty, one built not on blood or power, but on courage, sacrifice, and love.